Det är mycket snack också.
Hello and welcome to Sound Talk. This is a little video podcast format to share our thoughts on recording and the whole process, actually, recording vocal music and choir music. And also because we rarely sit down and pick each other's brain about this topic. So we also want to check out what other people are doing and what we can learn from each other as well. We are trying to break this process down in segments. This is the introduction segment of this little series. Anders, can you tell a little bit about yourself? And welcome to the show.
Hello, I'm Anders Edenroth. I'm one of the founding members of the Real Group, the Swedish a cappella quintet. We formed it when we were at the Royal Academy of Music in Stockholm in 1984, and I was an active singer there until 2021. And I've also been recording and producing a great deal of the albums that we have released. We have released a bit over 20 albums. The first couple of albums were... Actually, the very first album was recorded straight with 2 microphones, and we had tape marks on the floor just to know where we were supposed to be to get in the stereo field and to get in the balance. I remember me and Peter always being pretty far away from the microphone for some reason. After that, of course, we went in and did multi-track recordings. First albums were analog. Up until the 90s when we bought ADAT machines and started recording stuff in our own studio. In my 20s, I already worked a lot as a studio engineer. So that is a parallel competence that I've always had. So that's, perhaps a brief summary of who I am.
And Josef, can you tell us a little bit about you? And also welcome to this little series.
Thank you. My name is Josef Sjöblom, and I'm a choir conductor and music producer from Stockholm, Sweden. I've been a choir singer my whole life and been involved in a few vocal groups as well. I've also done a lot of recording projects with various groups, both for audio and video production.
I should introduce myself as well. My name is Morten Winter, and I am a former baritone in the Real Group. I sang with you, Anders, for almost 10 years, and I was also involved with the production of the releases that we did in that period, arranging, composing as well. So, we know each other from that time, and even before that, I also worked with other vocal groups and sang in choirs where we also recorded, and it's always been an interest of mine to also be involved in the process of recording. I guess that was also the brief presentation of me. And Anders, I have a question for you that might be interesting for other people as well. How would you say that your process has changed over the years? You talked about analog and ADAT, and now you sit in the box with your laptop most of the time, I assume.
Well, I think one major difference between when I started out was that back then we had sound engineers that were in charge of the recording studio. They took care of the tape recorders, the mixing boards, and they knew the technology, which was, very few could afford it. So very few could also learn it. So we had to rent a quite expensive studio and within just a few days record a full album. And of course, when we went digital in the 90s, we could have unlimited amount of studio time all of a sudden because we had our own equipment. We had like 1 microphone and a couple of ADAT machines. And this, of course, gave us the freedom to test ideas and to learn how does it work more properly to record vocals. And not only me, I was all of a sudden we could have all the members of the Real Group behind the ADAT machine and the microphone that we had. So we could be involved in the recording process all of a sudden. And then we actually took the ADATs to the studio and dumped it onto the 24 track, and then we mixed it in the actual professional studio environment. And of course, after that, we got into the hard disk recording era, where you basically can you have your studio with you in your laptop, and this even further simplified the process and made it much more accessible and cheaper for. So now, I mean, when I meet vocal groups, they have at least one really good sound engineer in the group. And that was not the case when we started out. It was quite rare that you had these multiple competences. And today they're not only audio engineers, they're also video producers and photographers. And it's like every vocal group has become like a Swiss Army knife of multimedia production. Inexpensively, fairly inexpensive. So this is really the big deal breaker for me, where the artist and the creator gets the tools in their hands 24/7. It's actually quite fantastic.
Yeah, and I guess Josef, you're one of those people that Anders is referring to that have had your hands on your whole life, basically, just like myself, I would say. How would you say it has been developing the last maybe 10, 15 years? I mean, a lot has happened.
Yeah.
In those years.
Yeah. Well, before that, I grew up in the 90s. So my father had an ADAT machine that I could look at. But later on in my teens, I got a computer, and that was the beginning of both having access to recording gear, but also knowledge from YouTube. So there were almost unlimited access and opportunities of learning, and a freedom in a sense. And I think the last 15 years, it's been a revolution with publishing music. So it's very easy with Spotify and with the streaming. So I never released a CD. I only release stream content. So I think that's the biggest revolution, and it's also very, very easy to spread your music with social media, but also hard because everyone is doing it. So it's a lot of noise out there to get through with your productions. Yeah.
I would say, if I'm talking from my point of view, I've also mainly been working digital. I haven't used YouTube as much as you, maybe, Josef. I've also been looking over the shoulder every moment possible, basically, in my career, while studying, trying to understand, like, these good sound engineers, how do they do it? How do they work? And then I picked a lot up on the way, and of course I also used YouTube, but very, very much learning by doing as well. For me,
I think that's the most effective way of learning, looking at professionals. I've missed that opportunity a lot of times. I've had the opportunity to be looking over your shoulders sometimes. It's not easy to know what questions to ask to YouTube. What do I need to know? I mean, the only feedback you get is when you make something and it's not good enough in a way. And then you need to learn about that. But if you are working with a sound engineer, they know all the problems that could occur.
And I think it starts with the analysis to begin with, to hear something, and if you like something, and check out, why do I think that this recording sounds great? What ingredients is it that I'm actually liking? Is it the music, perhaps? It's not a very good recording, but the music is fantastic, so you don't really care. Or if it's the video is great, so you don't really think about the audio production that much. Or can you actually listen to the sound and say, hey, this sound is actually very, very well recorded and mixed? Because if you can start there, you can also sit down when you're in your own recording session or mixing session. You can relate to things that you want to reach, things that you want to sound like. If you cannot judge a good recording from a bad recording, you probably can't make a difference in your own mixing or recording either, because you don't know what to listen for. So I think that is like number one. Start there.
Mhm. One thing that pops up in my head is that, I mean, with the development of this, like that you have your whole studio in a laptop these days, and you can control every little thing in your process, in your post recording. One of the questions that I need to ask myself all the time is, do I make this control not limit the expression of the music? Because that needs to be alive and that needs to be expressive and not controlled, even though I have the option to control it. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think majority of my experience comes from recording sessions in a studio environment. But while I think, Josef, you have much more experience than I do in recording live settings, especially larger choirs. So the workflow is actually quite different in these two situations. In my case, most of the time when I record things, I also have a score that I have written, or lyrics that I have written, an arrangement that I need to make into a recording. And that is also controlling my process a lot, because I think if you're like a nose to tail kind of person like I am, I already from the beginning know that this is what I want the audience to experience. I'm going to be the listener's guide through an experience. Sometimes you think as a listener that you actually choose to listen to the music in a certain way. But if it's a good mix and a good score, somebody has created a path that is really nice to walk your way through a mix. And without maybe second or third time you listen to it, you might listen to other things. And I think you probably can relate to that. So when you record, you need to know, where is this trail that you want people to walk through when they listen to the song, especially the first time. That's super important. And that controls to what kind of mic you choose, what distance to the mic, where you put different voices in the soundscape, how you pan it, how much reverb you put there, how much ambience you put there, what EQ and so on. So I sometimes get the question, which mic do you use and how far away from the microphone should we sing? And I said, well, it depends on how important that little note is. Is it super important? Then it needs to be very much up front. If it's a backup vocals, it maybe needs to be a little further back in the soundscape. So there's not an answer to the question. No. But Josef, I mean, it's a completely different story when you go into live recording with a choir, for example.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a big challenge there to make it interesting, putting up a camera so you can see the choir and having one microphone. That could be enough in many cases. But it could also be the most boring thing in the world to watch that kind of choir recording. So I always try to get close to the choir in a way, because a recording needs to be a bit larger than life. Or, I mean, you lose a lot of information and lose a lot of senses when you are recording something. When you're in the room listening to the choir, that's another experience. So I try to get close with the microphones, and I try to get close with the camera, and alternating between close and distant.
And I mean, we've talked about this before, and I heard you say that, like, when you use sound and image, it can be a more forgiving combo than one at the time.
Yeah.
So either the image doesn't have to be as good if the sound is really, really good, or the other way around. Not that you have to choose, but of course it will be great with a high quality audio and high quality image, but that it actually helps you if you have both.
Yeah, a great audio recording can save bad video footage, and the other way around.
Yeah, and I mean, I was in Germany a few weeks back, and I had a session with 15 singers from the UK, and they were standing in a circle around me, and they were singing their song. Great group. And the sound that you get when I turned around, I got a different sound depending on where my ears were pointing, and it was such a sweet experience. And most people who have listened to choir concerts, they are 20, 30, 50 meters away from the choir. They get a lot of hall. They never get that cool experience of being closer to the choir like we do, who actually work as conductors as well. So I think the recording that Josef speaks about, that you want to actually capture perhaps the conductor's experience in a way that is very close and have this exactly the same distance to all the singers, rather than the audience experience. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Josef, but...
Yeah, I mean, I'm a conductor myself, so maybe that's why I prefer it. But I think that's also the spot where the magic happens. My dad used to say, if you're on a concert, try to sit next to the sound engineer if it's like a pop concert, because that's where the sound will be the best. But in a choir concert, I believe the best spot is where the choir conductor is, because that's the person managing the sound.
Balancing everything.
Yeah.
Mixing the sound.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yes, I mean, a very normal choir setup would be actually a stereo pair above the head of the conductor, and then spot mics for the different parts. And you put the parts in, as I said, pieces of a cake. So you don't have like sopranos in front of basses, but you actually have sections, more like a symphony orchestra, actually. So it's easy to change the balance afterwards. And I normally place basses close to the middle when I record acoustic choirs, because I'm used to having bass in the middle, not to either side of the mix. I don't know what you do, Josef, but...
Yeah, it depends. I mean, it's really important that the choir singers are comfortable with making these changes, because if they rehearsed in a specific way, then they need to be standing that way. And sometimes I even let them stand in the like soprano, alto, tenor, bass, if that's the case. And then I put the basses in the middle in the mix. That can be a little bit confusing when you listen to it very close, but it's also a very natural thing when you're listening with headphones to get basses in the middle. Depends on the case, but I've heard recordings with basses on the side too, because that's how you listen to choir. So.
When I do my mixes, a cappella mixes, most of the time I split the bass channel into two separate tracks, one only containing bass information and one containing the rest. And then I send these two to one auxiliary, one bus, basically. That means that I can pan the overtones of the bass singer left or right, but the bass information will be dead center. And this is an old trick that comes from vinyl recordings, actually. Back in the good old days, they had to make, in order to engrave the vinyl albums, they have to make all the frequencies below a certain point mono, because otherwise the width of the stereo of the tracks that you were engraving, they became too big, actually. But it was a technical thing that made bass end up very
physical thing. Yeah.
Mono in the middle in order to squeeze in more songs on the album. But I still think it's pretty cool, because you normally have a lead singer in the middle, and you don't want a very busy bass part right there, especially since bass normally is a very dry information. It feels like that bass singer is standing in front of the lead singer. Then I move his overtones, usually to the left or right, which is also good. I mean, the real group has always been 5 people, and the lead singer in the middle, I need to put 2 on each side in order to get some kind of stereo image. And then, of course, it's really, really sweet too. I split it around like 200 hertz or something.
And today there's a lot of EQs with mid-side functions, or exactly those kind of stereo imaging plugins that can do exactly that thing
easily. I have a question for you also, with
cool.
Since we're talking tech stuff here. Do you think that your experience when you have learned the tricks of the trade gradually in your career, that has it also changed the way you arrange and compose?
Definitely, yes. To me, it's always a hard process to go through all the steps from having the musical idea in the first place, to finishing a composition, to arranging it for voices. Of course, they overlap all the way, and maybe even have an idea about how it should be produced. Sometimes I can hear the live energy here, and then that's what I need to translate into recording. Like if you wanted to balance acoustically, sometimes you would write it in a different way. And if you want to make it recording ready, then these syllables work better.
Yeah.
They are not as loud, or they will actually make it work quicker. Whereas if you're doing it for an acoustic choir, then you would also think differently, because it has to balance sonically from what is written on the page. So definitely it has affected a lot how I write, but it's also from song to song, from project to project. Like, what's the end station? Is it a recording or is it a concert that the song is being produced for? And then maybe even having a recording version, because that when you record this piece, we will have to change these things, dynamics maybe. When you put a microphone much closer, you will have issues with certain things. That knowledge definitely helps. Yeah, so we will wrap this little thing up, and looking forward to talk more about preparation in the next segment. See you there.
Det är mycket snack också.